Welcome back to the Autoblog podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. This is episode 686. Joining me today is road test editor and fleet manager Zach Palmer. How are you?
I am doing pretty swell this morning. How about yourself?
I am fired up. We're going to talk about two of the most expensive, most capable Porsches you can buy on this show. A lot of great stuff. We're also going to talk about your experience on the Indiana Nurburgring in the Bmw M3. We're going to get into our long-term Hyundai Palisade and your experiences with Super Cruise and the Cadillac Escalade. Touch on a few news items, Lotus, Genesis, maybe a little bit about the BMW 2 Series. We'll run through that quickly. Then we have two Spend My Monies. One came in literally right before we hit record. So we said, hey, what the hell? Let's roll with it. So yeah, man. I spent basically last week rolling around in the 2021 Porsche 911 Turbo S Cabrio. That means 640 horsepower. That means the top comes down. It's a pretty amazing car. It was a beautiful shade of blue. Inside was truffle brown. Yeah, and this is a few months ago, but since these cars are pretty, comparable, I think you drove just a regular turbo with, I believe, the hard top. So, I
did.
Yeah, I feel like we probably agree on this premise, and we could go from there, get into some of the nuances of these cars. But to me, this is the 911 right now. This is the best the car has ever been. This is stylistically, I feel like they've cleaned up some of the things in the past that got maybe a little overwrought when the car got bigger, say 10 years ago or so. And then just the power. It's just like an endless buffet of, okay, we're going to do this. I honestly, I think it was about 60 horsepower jump from the last Turbo S to what I drove. That's staggering, and they did a lot of things involving, the piezo injectors and some of the airflow, which were pretty neat tricks, things that, I haven't heard about since I went on an Aston Martin trip a few years ago, and they were kind of telling ways they were just maximizing that existing footprint and chassis and just systems that the car uses. So to me, this is we've been talking a lot about vaccines and things. This is the highest efficacy of the 911 as it stands. So yeah, that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, no, the way that you led that off there, this is peak 911. And if what you really care about is going fast in a straight line, yeah, absolutely. Peak 911. Obviously, we have the GT3 now that I don't think either of us have driven yet. For those that want the more back to basics, manual transmission, track level performance. But for a real supercar performance, the turbo is definitely top notch. I am pretty jealous of your having driven the S Cabrio. The coupe was utterly ridiculous in how quick it was. I can only imagine what that feels like with the top off, with the wind in my hair. That adds a whole nother, I guess, dimension of speed to that experience. Because that really is the main takeaway from this car is just how stupid quick it is. It's almost hard to put into words how fast it accelerates. Porsche goes and claims mid twos for it. Honestly, it feels like that 100% when you drop the hammer on the launch control. I know that I gave a couple friends rides in this thing in my week when I had it, and these are people that hadn't been in super fast cars before, just utterly flabbergasted at how quick it is. It puts a whole lot of other cars to shame. You have to get into something like a McLaren 720S or other kind of supercar to get this level of speed in a road car, which is rather shocking because it comes in this Porsche 911 package that looks relatively normal and that we're used to seeing it on the street, but has that wild side to it.
I turned onto Woodward Avenue, obviously very famous road here in Metro Detroit. I had it in sport mode. I had the top down at this point. It was this is probably the middle of the day. Sun was coming out, and I just dropped the hammer. And I feel like maybe in your story, you use the term like eyeball sucking or something, like
I
where it
did.
literally feels like your face is going to melt. And I thought to myself, damn, he's right. It's like literally you hold on and like it's like you're going into a wind tunnel, and it's awesome. So, there's that. And when you look at the capability of this car, I called it a supercar, and I'm not shy about throwing that term around because if you're going to have sort of the performance, the raw horsepower, and then some of the other like aerodynamic gizmos, you know, traditionally a 911, we could talk about this all day, whether it's a supercar, whether it's not. But when you're going to trim it out this way, in my mind, it's a supercar, especially when you look at all the different like things they give in the Turbo and the Turbo S model. So it's really something. I mean, I enjoyed using the different like the drive modes, if you will. You could like turn the knob right in the steering wheel, and it just go right into like wet mode, sport mode, normal mode, whatever it's called. It actually, at one point, I was out driving on a Friday morning. It just this downpour kind of came out of nowhere, and the car flashes and says, "Consider going into wet mode." I'm like, I think I will. That's a good idea. And then it was like, drive cautiously or something to that effect. I was like, yeah, I think that's probably a good idea. My car, of course,
Yeah.
had all-wheel drive too, so you kind of get that extra, degree of stability. But it's a
Yeah.
riot.
Yeah, no, the wet mode thing is pretty cool. I've driven a few different 911 versions now, and they all have those wet mode sensors where they actually have little sensors in the wheel wells that will detect the water splashing up against it, and it's really unique. And there's no other car that I'm aware of out there that can actually detect water on the road and tell you, hey, maybe use some sort of wet driving mode. But whereas the 911 has it, and it's really neat. I tried it out, and it sort of sends more power to the front. It doesn't let you get it sideways, I suppose. It definitely makes it a little safer. But just in general, on that topic of like ease of driving and safety, almost like this car, it might seem super intimidating from the numbers that we throw around and whatnot. When you're in the driver's seat, it really isn't like a difficult car to drive or anything like that. Like it's not like a Hellcat that's trying to rip your head off at every moment around. It's honestly just as easy to drive as like a 911 Carrera 4 or any other 911 out there. It's not a super car in that it's going to wear you out and beat you up, and you have to be clutching at the wheel with both hands for fear you're gonna send too much power to the rear and spin out. No, it's just super easy to drive, and that's been a sticking point with turbos, I feel, of the last couple generations. Obviously the original ones were a bit hairy. I know the original one had the Widowmaker nickname. So we've come a long way from those super hairy turbos to this one that is just like, oh, it's a luxury Grand Tourer that also has supercar performance.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because if you like this, almost to me wouldn't be your first 911, if that makes sense. Like you could get a ton of car on any number of 911s before you get to this price point. And frankly, that's probably the right move, if you will. Like plenty of power, plenty of, it looks like a 911. You get everything you need much lower in the Porsche 911 lineup, and that's great. But say you've been driving 911s, and obviously at this point you're probably, pretty fortunate individual, and you're like, well, I know what I'm doing, but I want more power, and I want more of the tricks that I can't get on a more of a base Carrera. Step up to this, and that's where I think you can reward yourself. Like, especially if you have some, high levels of driving skills too. Maybe that's where you might say, I want to take this car and try and reach more of its limits, like on a track or something. But to your point, if you don't, it's still not that hard to drive. I mean, the steering is direct, very linear. It gives you a substantial feel to it. but it's not going to break your wrists. I mean, I've driven Miatas that are much more difficult to like handle and keep on the road and do what you want them to. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's, I like to take this kind of loop where I drive it up to the M1 racetrack north of the city, and the roads around there get kind of like broken and bumpy. And that's one of those moments where when I did it in a McLaren last summer, I get a little nervous because like you're lower to the ground, you can't see as well. You get like, that's where the intimidation of driving like a specimen like this really comes up. 911, I'm just like, oh, okay. Yeah, but there's a pothole. Okay, I got this. It's fine. So, and that's also, I think, another point that was to kind of bring this full circle. If, like, say you're in the market for a supercar, but you don't want to be like in a submarine, like a Lamborghini, like, the Huracan Evo, or, any number of, McLarens, whether it's the 650, the GT, the 720, still, I mean, you're not, McLarens, I actually think that's an interesting example. They're fairly drivable. But even the NSX is a little challenging to see out of for like a third of the price. The 911, you don't have to have as much of that level of intimidation. It's more just like respect. Like, hey, you're driving a car that costs as much as a pretty nice house. Get past that, you can still see things, handles and steers, respect the power, respect the transmission, which will pull you back with those quick shifts from the 8-speed. But it's also something that like, you could do. And that's where when, I try to frame this as like the 911 is its highest evolution, the 911 is a supercar. To me, the GT3 is like a different animal. It's like comparing like, apples to bananas or apples to giraffes. You're going to like different things. Because that to me, I haven't driven this new generation of GT3. I mean, that to me is where you got to really know what you're doing. And our West Coast editor, James Riswick, knows what he's doing. Check out that review that we put up a couple weeks ago. If you just search for that, that gives you a good flavor of just a different flavor, if you will, of 911. So,
yes. Yeah, the GT3 is probably more my personal speed. If I were out there in the market with a couple $100,000 to spend, haha. But my God, if you want a daily driver, I think that the turbo absolutely is the answer for this. The age old which 911 question when you have over $200,000 to spend, which I'm sure so many people have that question, right?
Yeah. It did bring me back to the notion, like, because I drove the Cayman last fall and enjoyed it immensely. And sometimes I just get that feeling, oh, maybe this mid-engine layout, that's kind of what you want, But then it's like, I always go back to whenever I drive the 911, no. It's to me, the 911 is the car for Porsche, and I think it is for a lot of enthusiasts too. Now, if you gave me like a Cayman or a Boxster, or I could get a screaming deal on one, or I just found one I liked, I would not hesitate for 1 second. I have a strong attachment to both the Cayman and the Boxster. I drove them in Mallorca about 7-8 years ago and just enjoyed them immensely. I drove the GTS versions, drove them on a track. So if you have that kind of connection to those cars, I would obviously encourage you to get one too. But it does kind of go back to like, do you want the car that you see in the movies that Robert Redford drives, that, any number of famous people drive, that aspirational Porsche? Yeah, it's still the 911. But I don't know. We could get even more into like some of the little features of this. My take on this too is like, there's a lot of like Porsche greatest hits on the Turbo and the Turbo S, different features that aren't necessarily new, but they're like improved or optimized. I don't know if any stood out to you other than just the raw crazy power increase. But to me, it just felt kind of like listening to like, again, the highest evolution of the 911. There wasn't anything on here that blew my mind. Like when you drive like, something that's different or a radical redesign or new generation.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess one feature that I thought was really neat as I was just walking around and, messing with buttons and checking it out is the active aero on this thing.
Yeah.
It actually has an active front splitter. which is something that I haven't seen on, well, like any production car. So you throw it into Sport Plus mode. It's only in Sport Plus that it does this, but it extends this this sort of rubbery plastic front splitter that is otherwise tucked up under the front bumper, and it basically lowers your ground clearance by about, I don't know, I'd say about 2-ish, maybe 2.5 inches or so. Obviously gives you more downforce. And it's just like a really, really neat way to go about, having this car that has, like super high downforce and, shoves you into the ground. But at the same time, you can put that back up into a normal mode and have great ground clearance when you're driving around the city or wherever. And that to me is just like extremely cool stuff. There's also the side front intakes. They're also active in that those vents, move forward and down, basically just depending on what downforce mode you put it into. And then I had a lot of fun watching the air brake in back. Every time you'd slam the brakes on, with any decent amount of force, that air brake would fly up behind you. And it's obviously not doing me a whole lot of good on the road. It's it's definitely a track thing, to actually lower your braking distances. But it's just really, really cool to see those kind of race car like things, supercar like features on this 911, which are things you definitely don't get on just a regular 911 Carrera version.
Yeah, it's, you're really getting very sophisticated. I actually think the 911 right now is maybe it's always been this way. I guess I'm not old enough to really go back to like the 70s, the 80s, and really like have driven those cars in their time and place. But to me, the 911 is very precise. It's very technical. It's a car that offers you a lot of, features that can enhance your drive and do it in a very measured way. It's a car that, it's not just an idea. It like literally everything in a very logical kind of German manner counts. There's everything you need, nothing you don't. And honestly, I watched Ford versus Ferrari the night before I drove this. It just happened to be streaming randomly. And then I took it to a race track, and I was like, man, I want to track this thing. So a lot of these features of the Turbo S could really make a difference. The brakes, mine had carbon ceramic composite ones that, they're standard on the S model. I think they're an option on the base Turbo. Wow, those are some good brakes. Let me tell you, those things really, and it's like the brake feel is just like, it's like that, like right there. If you're listening to this, you can't see me putting my hands together. It's like that, some of the better brakes you'll get on almost any car, better than the NSX, better than, McLaren's, which if I recall the last McLaren I drove, I didn't particularly like the brakes as much. Very natural, holistic feel, very direct. So yeah. So I think we hit these 911s pretty hard. They are a riot. Any other thoughts?
Man. I'd say if you're thinking of buying one, probably do it. You're going to waste just about any other car out there that isn't a Taycan Turbo or probably a Tesla Model S Plaid at this point.
Yeah.
So nobody will keep up.
That's true.
It's so fast. So fast. That's got to be the final thought.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. It will pull your nose and your eyeballs back into your skull. It is that quick. So
yep.
We could leave it there. Let's talk about the M3, which you took to the Nürburgring. Why don't you tell us about this?
Yeah, Nürburgring in quotation marks, I suppose. To be more specific, the Indiana Nurburgring, or the Schweinfeiltrain, as the locals call it.
Got it.
So this whole idea came about, just because we are, still in COVID here, so we're not flying internationally. We're not going to the actual Nürburgring. So, what's something to do with a brand new BMW M3? Well, it's German, so we should take it to the Nürburgring. Well, we can't take it to the Nürburgring, so how about we go to the Indiana Nurburgring instead? And that is where I took this. So My ride for it specifically was the BMW M3 Competition. So that's the 503 horsepower version of the M3 that comes standard with the automatic transmission, not the manual. It's about a 4-hour drive down from Michigan to this area, which is near Bloomington, Indiana. If you're unfamiliar with the state, that's towards the south end of Indiana. And once you're there, you end up on this loop, which the locals have drawn out to mimic the actual shape of the Nürburgring. So if you go and read the story online, actually, basically titled "What's the Indiana Nurburgring," you'll see the map and you'll see the Google Maps outline. It is near a dead ringer for the actual Nürburgring, just supersized. So you have the actual Nordschleife, then you have the GP track that the F1 guys race on in the bottom left corner. Basically, you take this, it's about 175 miles of roads, and they're all incredible driving roads that you wouldn't expect there to be in southern Indiana. You know, you sort of think of Indiana as like this, I don't know, farming, corn state, you know, that just, you know, there's not a whole lot going on as far as hills, rivers, lakes, but this place will surprise you. It's actually full of hills, rivers, and lakes, and basically roads that never stop turning, never stop going up and down, and it's an absolute riot if you have a fun car. Obviously, I had the M3 Competition, so I had an extremely fun car out there. You know, brief takeaway, the car is fantastic out on those roads. Those roads have a little something to offer for any kind of a car, be it low power, high power. You know, it's definitely better if you have something lightweight that handles really well, though. I mean, the new M3, I know there's a whole lot of consternation about the way it looks. I actually came away after driving it for so many hours. It was 4 hours down there, like 5-hour round trip around the ring, then another 4 hours back. I looked at it a lot, and I ended up, you know, sort of changing my opinion. And that, you know, at the start I thought, this looks okay, I guess. To, okay, I really actually like the way this car looks. I don't know if that's just me getting used to it or what, but, you know, I found myself actually being more and more drawn to the design. Then actually driving it down there. Wow, this car, once again, similar to the 911 Turbo, really, really fast. I actually made a comparison to that 911 Turbo in my story, in that, you know, so long as you're not taking it from a dig, you know, so long as you're going like 40-ish some miles per hour and up, it's just about half a beat off from that 911 Turbo that we were singing its praises for being so quick. And that's obviously something you have to watch out for when you're on roads that are wide open like this. You don't want any speeding tickets. You don't want to, you know, be too irresponsible out there. So that's one reason why maybe a slower car might be more fun, because you can actually stay in the throttle and wring it out more. But no, there are a lot of super tight technical sections that the M3 really, really excelled at. And, you know, there's a whole lot to like about this M3. I think that, you know, don't really write it off based on the looks. You know, I learned a lot about the car down there, and you know, it's really, really a proper M car. You know, one of the other things that I was a little, you know, I guess suspect about going in was its 3,890 pound curb weight, which, yeah, that's pretty heavy, but they do a whole lot of wizardry and work in the suspension to make it feel like it's more like a 3,500 pound car, or maybe even a little less than that. So overall takeaway, Indiana Nurburgring, go, absolutely. You're going to have a riot pretty much no matter what you drive. And BMW M3 Competition, proper M car. It earns the M3 name, and yeah, you're going to like it. And I would definitely drive the manual too, though. I would, because both are brilliant, whether you get the manual or the Competition with the automatic.
Oh, that's the Indiana Nurburgring, and that's the BMW M3. I haven't driven this new version of it yet, so reading your report, I found that very interesting. One quick like coda to this segment, if you will. I'm starting to like the grill. I don't have
Yeah.
any issues with it. People, well, I do have some issues with it, but like aesthetically, it's weird. But if you look at grills over the years, even some old BMW grills from like the 20s, 30s, then they had some weird periods of like the 50s. Like the grill hasn't always been as subtle as people want to make it out to be. So, especially on a car like the M3, like it's going to be a larger grill with more pronounced like, active cooling features anyway. So I'm like, I don't know, I kind of like the whole like splitter to top of the grill look. I'm warming up to it. So that's it. Did you eat anywhere cool or enjoy any food at the Nürburgring?
I did actually. I ate at this place called Ooey Gooey Cinnamon Rolls,
Okay.
which is in Nashville, Indiana.
Okay.
Not Nashville, Tennessee.
Well, this is just super
They're
confusing. You went to the Nürburgring and ate in Nashville? Like,
eight in yeah, right. It makes a whole lot of sense. But yeah, really great cinnamon rolls. They live up to the name. And if you're looking for something that maybe isn't breakfast, maybe more like lunch or dinner, there are a whole lot of pork tenderloin restaurants around too. That's actually where the name comes from, Schweinfeiltring. So if you're a pork tenderloin enthusiast, that's just another excuse and a place to stop along the way.
sounds good. Sounds good. I'm getting hungry. It's a little past lunchtime. So, yeah, sounds good. So let's talk about a couple other cars that we spent a bit of time in. Hyundai Palisade long-term update, but let's start with the Cadillac Super Cruise. And they both have kind of the same threads here because my take on the Palisade is that it was a pretty easy driver up north with all the driver adaptive features, driver assistance features, but you had Super Cruise, which is like driver assistance on steroids. And this is the new latest version of it. No one at Autoblog but you has driven it, I believe. So what did you think?
Yeah, so once again, I took a little bit of a road trip to test this one out just because, well, that's the only way to test out Super Cruise. You have to find yourself on a highway that GM has mapped, with a LiDAR and precise GPS mapping. And that's where it works. So I took about a 350-mile road trip with this guy, and I came away really, really loving Super Cruise. I had only spent like a short period of time on the highway in a CT6 before this, and I can definitely say that the updates that Cadillac has made to this new version of Super Cruise makes it even better. The big, upgrade to speak of here is the automatic lane change, which some cars actually already have. So if you happen to a BMW with its driver assistance systems that has auto lane change. Teslas also have auto lane change, but now it's part of the Super Cruise portfolio. So you just tap a turn signal and it automatically moves over to the left or right. Just super easy for you. Works pretty much every time, except if you're on like a very, very tight radius corner. Found that it struggled there a few times, but that was the only area where it was semi-problematic. Beyond that, though, I really think that like any sort of a Cadillac, especially the Escalade with Super Cruise, is probably like the ultimate road trip car in that it's the most relaxing. You're going to arrive to your destination feeling the most relaxed and not fatigued in the least bit. It's because the car is doing it itself. And I mean, when I say that, it's doing it itself, and you really don't have to do anything with the steering wheel. I mean it. You're sitting there for hundreds of miles at a time and staring straight ahead as the camera watches you and the IR blasters watch you, and it's just doing it. It works really, really well with their system of radar sensors and front camera keeping the lines. The only times that I actually felt like I needed to nudge the steering wheel here and there, or when I went into construction zones, or when a semi truck decided to, edge over into my lane as they are wont to do.
And that's where I think General Motors really is getting it right with Super Cruise. Unlike, say, Tesla, who is marketing it as truly like an autopilot, Cadillac, Chevy, General Motors is saying, hey, you got to drive, but this could really help you. And I do think that's the right approach. So in a large vehicle like the Escalade, that's a lot of work to drive, somewhere like, say, I don't know, up north. Not in the sense of like a Jeep Wrangler or a Miata requires inputs and steering and corrections and full attention. You always need your full attention when driving, but you know what I mean? It's not like it's a very invigorating experience, but still a very large battleship of a vehicle that you want to, keep your eyes on the road for. Super Cruise can make that a little bit less work and can help you out. So we named it our Tech of the Year a few years ago, and this version is even better. Speaking of Tech of the Year, we named, basically it was Kia's safety suite of technologies, including like lane departure warnings and all sorts of different things, automatic braking. Tech of the Year back in 2020. It was our last sort of, major Tech of the Year presentation before the pandemic. We're working on spooling that back up. But the system in Hyundai vehicles is basically the same thing. And we have many of those features in our long-term Palisade. And I just took it on a pretty long road trip. It was, I want to say it's like 320 some miles door to door. I drove well up north, as we say here in Michigan, into the Upper Peninsula, which if you look at a map, it's kind of funny. Many times cartographers will think it's part of Canada or Wisconsin. It's quite amusing. But no, it's part of Michigan. And it's a good long drive. And then I drove back. So you're talking like 640, 50 miles just in a single, few days. And all of these features I thought really made a difference. The adaptive cruise control is spot on. I'm kind of coming up with a short update on just how all of these made my life easier. And I mean, literally it's point and shoot. You set it, it's easy to engage using the buttons that are right there in the steering wheel, and it modulates speeds. Even on hills, it was, keeping me, at a consistent pace. Lane departure warnings were spot on. It's nice when you also have those cameras that you can engage using the turn signals. Those are quite helpful. After having had the Palisade for probably 6 weeks, I realized I've had a pretty good long stint in this car, actually. 5 weeks at least. You really get used to it, especially in certain circumstances where, maybe you check your mirrors, you glance your other mirror, and then it's like, boom, yep, see that guy's grill on the camera, I'm good to go. So that really, the cameras really help, if you will, on the sides. And if you do screw up, you hit the button, you don't see somebody, you don't get the warning, it has a very aggressive intervention. It'll push you back towards your lane and try to stop you from going too far. And that actually happened to me. I was coming around a curve, and I think I was kind of like just wandering, if you will, as one is wont to do on a curvy bend of an expressway where there's a lot of room. It's easy just to kind of go a little wide, if you will. And it pushed me back like, dude, you're wandering and there's a car here. And I was like, okay, fully awake. Okay, here we go. And, obviously everything was fine, but it was like, oh, hey, that's how it's supposed to work. So I was glad it did. And just, the Palisade's a great road trip vehicle. Obviously these systems, as we honored in our Tech of the Year a couple of years ago now, very good. Not quite at the level of Super Cruise or Autopilot, if you will, but very usable, very of the times. Like, you're not really breaking, you are breaking a little new ground, but it's really just in some ways, to go back to our 911 thoughts, it's the highest evolution of existing technology. Cameras, LiDAR, some intervention, cruise control, stuff that's been around for years, but all working together to keep me safe, keep my dog safe. It was a good drive up north to meet the rest of my family. So,
yeah. So I was actually in the Kia Carnival here as of late that has, all of those exact same driver assistance features that we have in the Palisade. And I was in a Kia K5 GT, I want to say like a few months ago, and I actually wrote a story about all of these driver assistance features, and both Kias, Hyundais, and Genesises have them as well now. Genesises, whatever you want to call it. And honestly, like as far as like non-luxury manufacturers, I would probably put Hyundai's, like the Hyundai Group system as the best out there with their highway driving assistant. It keeps the lane, nearly as good as an actual Super Cruise does. Obviously, you do need to have your hands on the wheel when you're using it, so there is that. But it's really, really good at actually keeping those lanes. The adaptive cruise control, like you said, super smooth. It never makes any like herky jerky moves on you. And once again, I was really enjoying those blind spot cameras, where they show up in the little gauges there on the side. They don't, make all that much sense at night, or really in the rain. I was struggling seeing much of anything at night and in the rain with them. But in the day, they're fantastic. Those combined with actual blind spot sensors in the mirror and the blind spot collision avoidance, as you just tested out there, it's almost impossible to hit somebody in your blind spot unless you force the car over there, which is really important and good, because that's where a lot of highway accidents happen. People just move over and they don't realize anybody's there, and boom, now somebody's smacked someone in the rear fender, and somebody's spinning out, and other people are getting caught behind you. So yeah, all these are really, really good safety systems that hopefully make an actual difference on the road.
Yeah, they did for me. So moving along to a car that's probably a bit trickier to drive. That's the new Lotus, revealed this week. This is, what really caught my attention is just how this thing looks. Obviously we'll include the link in the show notes here. It's got a lot of the Lotus things you would expect: turbo 4, 3.5 liter V6, aluminum bonded chassis, like all the Lotus things are offered in evidence here. This is like the best Lotus I can remember in quite some time. I believe they, as far as looks, I believe they sort of say they're trying to summon the spirit of the Esprit, if you will. It's funny when you talk about Lotus designs. They always are harking back to something from years ago that was great. And it's like, well, okay, that doesn't really look like that, but sure. But, check out the story. News editor Joel Stockdale wrote this up this week. It's a really beautiful car. And I think, to me, this in some ways really helps Lotus get back on the map a little bit here in the really high-end performance crowd, reminding people that, hey, this is an interesting vehicle, interesting car if you're in the market for something such as this. Like I said, no real surprises here, but just for me, it was just wow. I didn't think it would look quite like this, and they did a great job.
It is so pretty, isn't it? Just jaw-droppingly pretty. I didn't expect it to look this good either. Especially based on what the Evora looked like. The Evora looked pretty average as far as I was concerned. It was sort of disproportionate in some ways and not exactly flowing and pretty. Whereas this Lotus, it's legitimately pretty, and you could call it beautiful even, which you can't. It hasn't always been a thing throughout Lotus's history, and they haven't always made beautiful cars. They made amazing cars to drive, but this one has an actual sports car like beauty to it that I was not expecting. You were not expecting. I don't know that anybody was expecting. And the fact that you can still get that screaming 3.5 liter supercharged Toyota engine in it and a manual transmission. And the interior looks modern and nice with an infotainment system that isn't, an aftermarket unit from Alpine. It looks like the real deal, and it actually I think has some capability to steal more sales from, say, like the Porsche Cayman than the Evora ever did. That's for sure. with an actual a nice interior with, a few luxuries and whatnot. And obviously the looks too. I am psyched to drive this thing. This might, as far as sports cars under $100,000, this is right at the top of my list for cars I'm excited about now.
Same. And aside from just the novelty, I feel like I would tend to skew towards like a Cayman just because, hey, I want Porsche to back up my money, if you will, versus like Lotus. But if you can sort of push that aside, yeah, this has the whole new special vibe about it that, I mean, you're not going to, like, you'll see a Cayman or a Boxster or Porsches on the road. No matter where you live, you will not see, even in Hethel, England, you will not see many Lotuses rolling around. So, super psyched about this one. And it's always interesting when Lotus does roll out a car because it happens very seldomly.
I know, and this is going to be the last gas one too.
Yep.
So this is it, folks, and it looks like it's going to be a good one.
It's interesting too, just to really quickly follow up on that. Jeremy Korzeniowski, our consumer editor, just wrote a column like a couple of weeks ago saying, if you want an awesome gasoline-powered car, now's the time. And there was a little part of me that was like, be a few years. You'll still be able to get some things for a little while, but not for everything. And like in the case of Lotus, they're rolling the credits and playing Journey here. This is it for gas-powered Lotuses, or so they say. So if you want one, you got to get this one. Will you probably be able to get a gas-powered Corvette for a few more years? The Mustang? Probably. But this is it. It's going to be electric after, the next generation of Loti roll out. So, kind of cool.
Extremely cool.
Let's talk about the Genesis G80. This is hardly enormous news here, but frankly, I just think this car looks so good. This is the sport model. You wrote this. Basically, it's a little bit sportier styling, which I think it already had. And you get rear wheel steering, which you're really starting to see things on Genesis cars and SUVs that are, this is high level stuff that you would see on like Porsches or, some like AMGs. And Genesis is giving you a lot of capability. And to me, like, I'm really taken with their designs. I really think they're good looking vehicles. Both the crossovers and the sedans. So why don't you just take us real quickly through what this is?
Yeah, so this is the G80 Sport model. So we've had just the standard G80 previous to now. That was a new car a year ago. And I know that we've had a few editors drive it for us. Everybody's really, really liked it. It's an awesome E-Class, alternative. But just like the previous G80, this one is getting a sport model. Now, we haven't been given engine specs, transmission, any suspension stuff, but it will be sportier than the current one. So expect, maybe some stiffer dampers, maybe some bigger anti-roll bars, stickier tires. But we know for sure it's going to have rear wheel steering, which is a very, very neat feature that should hopefully make it feel a bit more agile. And we also get slightly different styling. Basically, there's a lot more grille at the front, which is sort of hard to do with the old one. That one was already mostly grille. This one is even more grille at the front. And then, your typical sporty bunch of dark accents. And there's an optional red interior that I really dig too. You can actually go a red exterior with a red interior, which I'm still a pretty big fan of. So, if you're looking maybe at like an E-Class, maybe like the E450 with the inline six, this G80 Sport looks like it might be a pretty decent alternative, and I bet it's going to cost a lot less than the Mercedes or a comparable 5 Series as well. And because it's a sport, I can almost guarantee it's going to handle pretty good. So yeah, I'm pretty excited for it.
The Genesis lineup right now, I think, is, if we were going to do a design like lineup ratings, just, what brand has great looking cars, what brand doesn't, I would say they consistently have some of the most beautiful vehicles out there. They're aggressive. Some might say it's a little And by aggressive, I mean they're going for it. They're going for a real, unmistakable, beautiful look. The cars themselves, I think, are managed to be a nice blend of, like, they make a statement, but they're not gaudy. Although some of those headlights and the curves, it gets a little, closer to, a more aggressive look than you'll see in some other brands. But it's a good looking lineup. I applaud them for actually trying to create an image here based on style. It's like what Infiniti did 10 years ago, frankly. They really had these styled up cars that, frankly, were very good. And in some ways, I feel like Infiniti has gotten a little more back to the pack in terms of design. But yeah, they're really beautiful cars. So let's spend some money.
Let's do it. Money spending time.
Okay. Alrighty. So let's see. This one comes from Josh in Dallas, Fort Worth. He says, "Hi, Greg and Jeremy." Jeremy's not here today, but he also says hello. "Love the show. Thanks for keeping Saturday lawn mowing sessions interesting with your podcast. Glad to hear we can help. I need to cut my grass." We had an interesting spend my money piece a few weeks back about a gentleman who had 2 cars, which opened up a host of different options about which ones to sell and which one to buy. He has a similar sort of first world dilemma. He has a 2012 Ford F-150 King Ranch with a twin turbo V6, which is daily driver for many years. And during the COVID lockdown, he spent a lot of time perusing classifieds. Hey, who didn't? He picked up a CPO Cadillac ATS-V with the 6-speed manual, Recaro seats last October. It's a 2016 model to split daily driving duties with the truck. So, hey, that's awesome. It's a good way to spend the pandemic, I guess. Buy a Cadillac. So congrats for sort of going for it. To complicate things, he also put a refundable deposit down on a Ford Lightning, because who could resist a new $28,000 truck, factoring in that $12,500 tax credit, which I think you and I have discussed. Even if you don't need one, you're getting one of the, what appears to be one of the best, most capable electric vehicles, F-150, on the market. Hello, I don't know a better way to spend $28,000, frankly. So, yeah, I'm paraphrasing Zach in a little bit of a more dramatic manner, but I think that's what he was thinking.
It is.
So, yeah, so that's the fleet. He may or may not follow through with the order. Okay, so here's the spend my money part. He's driven the ATS-V long enough to enjoy it, but he wants to find himself grabbing something unique. Track-worthy, gas-powered cars, something like that before they go extinct. Other parameters: needs to be a manual or a good DCT, should be track-capable, high-powered, naturally aspirated 6 or V8, and he would like to keep this car as a little bit of sort of maybe an investment, see it hold its value or appreciate. Here's the options. Keep the ATS-V and the 2012 F-150, no Lightning, so basically do nothing. Keep the ATS-V, buy the Lightning, sell the 12 F-150. Option C, with a budget of $40,500, is buy a, up to us, and then hold on to one of the trucks. So it's sort of like go all new and then buy something else. I suppose there could be an option D where we just do whatever we want. Zach, I will kick this one over to you, and I should warn everybody, stay with us. We have a bonus, spend my money. Go ahead, Zach. What do you think?
Yeah, so I'm going to go straight to option C here. And I'm going to say go and buy a Mustang Shelby GT350 and keep your Lightning reservation. I guess it's an all-Ford garage now. But if you want a unique gas-powered vehicle, the manual transmission, track-capable, naturally aspirated, I don't think that there is a better option out there right now than a slightly used Shelby GT350. You're probably looking towards the top of your budget to get a really nice one, around $50,000. But you can get what is currently my attainable dream car is a Shelby GT350. I don't think that there's any more fun car out there for that price. And it's definitely going to make better noises than your ATS-V. It's also probably going to be a little more fun than your ATS-V to drive. And just maybe a little bit better on track. Honestly, your ATS-V on the track is a fantastic vehicle. There's nothing wrong with that thing out there. It was engineered and designed to be on the racetrack. However, a Shelby GT350 to me is just a little bit more focused and a little bit more fun out there. And yes, keep the Lightning. Greg, you summed that up already perfectly. There's really nothing left to be said there. Get the electric F-150.
So I think we're in agreement there. Just, the 12 F-150, it's done its turn. It's done its time. I think I'd move on to that. Get the electric F-150. You're not going to regret that. Probably get like an in-house charger or something too. I use the mobile charger that came with the Mach-E. Not sure if the truck has a different one, but it worked great. Many areas also offer you like a credit, either a refund with your bill or even a tax credit as far as installing some infrastructure like in your garage. I would probably go ahead and do that in some form too. So short answer, get the Lightning. The ATS-V is a little tougher for me to give up because frankly, that's a car that I really like. I like how it looks. I like how it sounds. The interior is okay. But to me, that's almost one of my like go-to options, if you want something that's, taking a bit of a depreciation hit and you can get it, and there's not a lot of things out there, that's kind of one of the cards I like to play and spend my monies. And frankly, I think you just gave the perfect answer there, Zach, as far as going with the GT350. I mean, that is the perfect answer. I think you thread the needle. So I'm going to throw a couple other options at you, Josh, here that frankly aren't quite as good as Zach's answer because that's the best blend of performance and track capabilities. I would look at a 392 Challenger or Charger as far as naturally aspirated. That's a great sound. It's an amazing V8. It gives you plenty of horsepower. The track part of it, not so much. I don't know just how serious you are about the track. I mean, if you like fishtailing around tracks and, paying for extra tires, think Mopar. But as far as just naturally aspirated engines, that 392 is pretty sweet. And then I would also, this is going to be a little like counterintuitive here. I would actually look a little bit at Lexus. The 5-liter V8 that you could get in the LC and the RCF, I believe, it's a great engine. Again, not nearly as good on the track as the GT350, but it's a different look. It's a luxury sports car, and it's a pretty cool engine. So just a different take, I guess, if you will, if you're willing to kind of just think about this in a different manner. But those would be, I'd say, other options.
I really like the idea of a Lexus RCF, actually. And there's an RCF track edition that is probably about a year old at this point that is slightly more focused. I think they were a bit overpriced and not exactly worth it from the factory. But maybe you can get one that's taken a bit of a depreciation hit. And that could be like a weird, sneaky alternative to a GT350.
That's right. That's right. All right, let's move on to question number 2. Let's see here. We have, this just came in this morning and it came in directly to Zach. So I said, hey, we got to just throw this on the podcast. So this one comes from Rob. All right, this is random. I'm a 59-year-old dude who just sold his 2010 Mitsubishi Evolution SE. Only 340 SEs were brought into the United States. I didn't know that, did you? Kind of cool.
I did not. Fun fact.
It had the SST, which is shorthand for dual clutch automated transmission, which was kind of crazy in some of those old Evos, but I liked it. I'll say that. Car was a blast to drive. At Auto Week, we had a long-term, I want to say 09 Evo, and it was really amazing. It was a lot of work to drive, though. The chassis, I still have vertebrae issues from it. Wants to replace it with the new BMW M3, okay, or the 2022 VW Golf R. Geez, this is like the Autoblog Zach Palmer Spend My Money edition here. So
it is.
I have to have the manual transmission as they are more fun, and it won't be a daily driver. So that's a lot of self-awareness here. All right, here's the problem. Let's see, his wife has a few back issues, and she did not like the Recaro seats in the Evo. Those Recaro seats, let me tell you, like I just said, those are something. It was a little loud, road noise. I mean, that's an understatement. It was pretty loud, and it was kind of rough riding. Willing to pay the big bucks for a new M3. In a way, it might be hard to flog a car with almost 500 horsepower. The new 2022 Golf R has caught his attention. He'd like to take it to the local track and not feel entirely guilty, whereas the BMW at the price point might make him feel guilty. So just for clarity, he wouldn't feel guilty driving the Golf R at the track. The M3 he might. I don't know. If you can obtain an M3, I wouldn't feel guilty about that at the local track. I mean, so it goes. I
Hmm.
digress. Wants to be able to take a car from San Antonio to El Paso. That's almost 600 miles with some semblance of comfort and a quieter interior than the Evo. Well, I think that'll be almost anything. Power front seats would be good and helpful. I agree. What are your suggestions? If I keep this car for the next 11 years, which I probably will, I'll be 70. I also want to think about getting in and out of the vehicle at that age. He's 6'4". He finds the 2022 Golf R intriguing. It sounds very Evo-ish, only more refined. So in this case, you have literally driven all the cars that he is questioning. I'm just going to turn this over to you. And if I have any final thoughts, I'll add them.
Yeah. So leaning towards Golf R, I think, is a very good way to lean because as you read my story, the headline was it's way more fun now. Uh, Basically, I was honestly not a huge fan of the Golf R before the Mark 8 generation, but the new all-wheel drive system makes it a lot more fun, and it definitely makes it a little bit more like your Evo. Give it that little tail happiness to it. It's also really quick. Which is obviously fun and great on a track. And the fact that you can get in a manual is really awesome. The one that I drove was the DSG. I have no qualms with that DSG at all. It's a fantastic transmission, and it would actually be a pretty good, I guess, way to transition from your Evo with the dual clutch to the Golf R with the dual clutch. One car that I will bring up, if you don't go Golf R, which I think is a very good idea here, is a Civic Type R. Now I know it's front wheel drive, which is different from your Golf R, which is all wheel drive. Obviously, way different from the M3, which is far more expensive and rear wheel drive. But you say you want something fun. It doesn't have to have gobs of horsepower. It just needs to be fun. You can really flog it and has all of the creature comforts that your wife might want. A Civic Type R has a lot of those things, and honestly, I think that if I think back to when I drove a Type R, when I drove the M3 with the manual, when I drove the Golf R, honestly had more fun in that Civic Type R than all of those cars. If we're just counting like pure fun as the actual decider here. Now, if you want something that is more luxurious and more comfortable, it's got to be Golf R. If you're willing to make a couple sacrifices, I think that you might actually be surprised by the Civic Type R, as long as it's something that you might like looking at. But seeing as you own an Evo, those things are not exactly subtle. A Civic Type R might actually be up your alley. So just wanted to toss a third thing in there to maybe complicate your decision even more. But Golf R or Civic Type R, I think, would be my final two answers.
Sounds pretty good. I would concur with both of those. So Rob and Josh, let us know what you're going to do. If you have any follow-ups, more questions, we love to spend your money. That's podcast@autoblog.com. If you want to get the latest news from Autoblog, you can get that on your smart speaker. It's called the Autoblog Daily Digest. Say, hey, Google, play the news from Autoblog, and you'll get our latest news. The stories will be basically read out to you. So you can listen to Autoblog, the website, while you're working out, walking the dog, whatever you want to do. And of course, if you like the Autoblog podcast, give us a 5-star rating. Subscribe to us on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. Be safe out there, and we'll see you next week.